Thank you so much for being here, both of you. Sandy Rower is, of course, president of the Calder Foundation and the grandson of Alexander Calder. And Richard Tuttle is Richard Tuttle, an artist that many of us revere, and whose exhibition 18 by 24 is in its final days on the third floor of the gallery and will remain on view and open to the public, to you all, tonight till 8:30. So please stop by the show afterward, after the talk. I'm mainly just here to cut the two of you off when you go too long because no one wants to hear what I have to say, but I do want to run through, just very briefly, some slides of the exhibition in Los Angeles because, with the caveat that you cannot possibly understand what you're seeing if you were not there physically. I would imagine many of us were in fact not there physically. This show opened in January of this year and ran through February. And it also coincided with a show of Richard's work that was at the David Kordansky Gallery, so that was a special moment for Richard as well. But what was really extraordinary to me was to see how this exhibition completely changed my way of seeing Calder's work. And I'm fascinated to hear the two of you talk about how your dialogue informed some of the very interesting and unusual maneuvers that took place in this show. So I'm just going to take 3 minutes and run through these slides, and then I'll turn it over to the two of you. So what you're seeing on the screen here is the entrance to the show, and you're seeing the work Black Petals from 1939, and almost every work in this exhibition is from 1939. As you enter the show, you're struck by the fact that what you see are these large white pavilion sort of structures that are display apparatus that Richard designed to both house and protect the sculptures by Calder. So as one comes into the room and approaches the first sort of pavilion on the right, you get framed in front of you this incredible work, the tuning fork, which is an extraordinary sculpture. And Sandy, you can tell us more about it in a little bit, but just giving you a close-up. And moving past that, you encounter yet another one of these pavilions, which contains what seems at first to be one work, but is in fact 4 separate works, connected in many ways, but nonetheless 4 separate works which are installed together not on a solid surface, but on 3 panels precariously hanging over this void at the center. Here's an image of one of those works, and 2 more. There is a mobile in the back corner of the room, which again has a sort of corresponding structure, preventing people from walking under it, but also doing a lot more. Next to that, on the wall, was a drawing. The only work in the show not from 1939, I think from 1937, but clearly related to the form in the mobile. But in fact, you don't see the drawing as you approach it because it's covered by fabric, and you have to raise the fabric to see it. Turning around, one finds that one of these other pavilions that seem to be solid is in fact open, and it's a structure for showing a series of works on paper. These 5 works which are crayon, pencil, ink, and gouache in various different combinations. Here's some details there. And finally, the last pavilion in the main room, which is closed on all sides except for these slits, through which you see this amazing work made of painted sheet metal, as most of these sculptures are. And of course, you only see it as you approach through these various different occluded and truncated views. So I'm showing you as you move around it, the 4 different views. Through one of them, you see the leaves of Black Petals. Here's somebody looking through as if they were just where we were. And then there's a second space, as you come around the corner, where you encounter first this extraordinary work, which is in fact the most visible, I would say, of everything in the show. And then you turn and there's sort of a long rectangular space on the right is a series of maquettes in wood, wire, and lead, which I believe Calder made for a proposal for the Smithsonian in 1939. At the end of the hall is this incredible object, perched on a little structure, which I have to imagine, Richard, is a structure of your creation.
Yes.
And then turning around, there's another almost proscenium-like or sort of puppet show theater-esque wall, through which, as you come up to it, through that sort of square window, you see this, which is in fact this work. So that's the show, and here again is Black Petals, 1939. So I would just start by saying, why 1939, first of all? I mean, there's a lot of extraordinary work in the show that I don't think had been seen by many people in a long time, as I understand it. Why 1939? Why these works? But also, how did this whole conversation start? And so what was the trajectory that brought you from the idea of Tuttle curating a Calder show to this exhibition as it happened in Los Angeles? And maybe, Sandy, I'll start with you. How were you approached, or how did this come up first?
Well, that's way too far down the road for me.
Okay.
I've got to go way back. When I first met Tuttle, I call him Tuttle. When I first met Tuttle was at Pat Steer's house. Pat is over here. She came tonight. Thank you, Pat. And Joost Elfers. And they have always these incredible soirees at their house. And there was this Tuttle dude and Maymay, his amazing wife. And Maymay was very gracious and very approachable. And Tuttle wasn't. Tuttle was a fearsome, scary guy who was unapproachable and very opaque. And that's okay. I like scary guys. But I never really got to know Richard. And he's like, he knew my mom a little bit and my dear friends and so on. And then one day there was a show at Emmy Pulitzer's foundation of a Calder show that I went to the opening of with my son Griffin, who's here, coming here? He's almost here. And I see Tuttle, and I say, hey, Tuttle, hey, yeah, I met you at Pat and Yoast's, and he knows exactly who I am. And he starts to talk about the tragedy of Calder. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I hear this all the time from people, what they know about Calder, blah, blah, blah. But Tuttle is actually highly intelligent. You know this. And he tells me this whole litany about these, decades or lifelong ideas of pondering Calder and how nobody understands Calder, and then also tells me there's never been a good Calder show. And I said, okay, that's great. That's a great opening. And so then I saw him 3 months later. How many was this 7, 8 years ago? It was a while back. Really? And I saw him a few months later, and I said, oh, hi, Richard, I'm Sandy, as if he wouldn't remember me. And we had this conversation. He remembered every syllable of the conversation, remembered everything he said, his total brilliance. And I was just completely floored. I'm very unusually floored by somebody who tells me something about Calder and their own emotions about Calder and how they're feeling about Calder. And so Mark Glimsher said to me, I'm opening this gallery in LA. What show do you want to do? And I said, I want to do Calder and Tuttle. And he's like, okay, why not? Naturally. That makes no sense to anybody except in my brain, having Tuttle and Calder's work together and start to see these unseen forces and bring these forces together. So I say to Richard, here's your chance, knock us out with something. Okay, so you go.
He's worse at answering a question than I am. It's going to be a long evening.
I'm getting to the answer.
No, actually, one of the things we learned from this LA exhibition was the experience of the people who minded the show, that it was 50-50, that 50% of the people were furious because they wanted to see the Calder show they're used to seeing. And 50% were really happy because they saw a Calder show they had never seen before. So I don't think art is about taking polls, but I would expect the cognoscenti to be much smaller percentage than 50%. So I think this point was, I think there's, life is short and there's so many important things, and the problem is to condense get the most out of it. And one of the important ideas I felt was that Calder, who is an estimable artist, is someone like all artists who has something to say. And in the process of time and how his work is perceived, also we can't help but build institutions, and we can't help but recognize that institutions degrade. Gravity takes place. So some little punk has to come along and say, well, I have an energy, that can take us in another direction.
Was I the punk? Or
No,
you
no,
were the punk?
no, I was, yeah.
I want you all to know, he didn't answer the question either, okay? Yeah. It's not just me.
Yeah. We're both, I think, part of this evening, and it was okay. All right.
I think it is pretty punk to say to the president of the Calder Foundation, "There's never been a good Calder expedition."
Yeah, I've done 116 Calder shows, and this motherfucker says they all suck.
Yeah.
And he thinks he's offended me. I'm just super excited that he's got an idea, because I know he's got an idea.
But it's also, I mean, if anything, we've learned the truth is comes from a kind of complexity, an orb of complexity, and I have so much respect and admiration for what Sandy has done. I mean, it is thrilling to me to talk about details, historical dates or shows that happened or people who were in the mix, or and the learning that I've gained is enormous, and also goes on. Recently, somebody sent me a catalog of Miro, and I mean, it's a detail of and I realize more than ever this connection between Calder and Miro, and funnily enough, that led me to appreciate Miro's sculpture more than I've ever appreciated Miro's sculpture. It's great. I love the farm, the first breakthrough work of Miro, but I'm sort of lukewarm about the rest of it. But that relationship,
Wait, you only like one Miro, the farm?
Yeah, pretty much.
Just checking.
Yeah. Well, you can see that the relation between the farm and that work that's hanging on the wall there.
I should say we're surrounded by two works. One, obviously, by Alexander Calder, Peau Rouge from 1969, Red Skin, which Sandy pointed out is in fact a maquette, very large.
For a huge work.
For a huge work, yeah. And then Richard's The Critical Edge 3 from 2015.
Okay, I'm going to get back to your question, because this is really, really important.
Okay.
Your question was, why 39? So I didn't know how to artists are messy. You don't know this, but artists are very messy. So I didn't know how to wrangle Richard in this whole my little brilliant idea, having Richard do something with Calder. I had no idea where we were headed. So I said, come to the foundation and let's look at some works together and let's see where this can go. And he walks in, he says, I want that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. And I'm like, okay, we could chat. And every single work he chose was from 1939.
Wow.
And so then we printed out a list of everything we owned from 39. He said, that's the checklist. That's how it happened.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole other discussion about 39 and the meaning of 39. But it was just so seamless. It just happened like that. And that's it. Those are all the works. And amazingly, there was a work that we didn't own. These are all works from us. Nothing's borrowed. But there was a work we didn't own we wanted to put in the show, and it became complicated. It was a big hanging mobile from 39. And I decided to axe that work, and I brought out a work that nobody knew. Not even Arnie Glimcher has ever seen this mobile from 39, and it's related to MoMA's great mobile of 39 in the principal stairway from, that was the commission for MoMA in 39. And that's the mobile with that octagonal space below it with 3 cages suspended in air. I was saving it for a museum show, But then when this other thing happened, I was like, okay, Richard, I'm giving it to you, not as a gift, but I'm giving it to you to be in your show because it's this amazing piece that none of the curators know. And we have a few of those works that are unknown. They've just been in Calder put them in storage, and they've been in storage since ever. So that was 39.
Okay, I'm going to, if I may, follow this non-segue direction. I see the great architect Stephen Hull is in the audience here. And this show owes so much to him. We did a show at Pace where there were problems that I couldn't solve, and nobody else could solve. And I called my great friend Stephen to please come in and look at the show, and he said something very simple, that that the critical issue was a case where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, and I knew from that he was talking about architecture. And as much as you know about painting, as much as you know about sculpture, it doesn't necessarily make you know about architecture. And that was a huge learning step for me, and trying to learn as much from that as possible. I went to really understanding that sculpture as we know it, I mean, you could even say since the Renaissance, has always had a dependency on architecture. And in my heart, I love sculpture so much that I cannot accept that sculpture, which I love so much, is in a dependent relationship. It can only be in any effort an artist makes can only be toward the independence of sculpture, to make sculpture free of architecture. And so how do you do that? Given this, more or less, total acceptance. And what I found is that you take the sculpture that is unrecognizably dependent on architecture, and you put it in relation, a conscious relation to architecture, and then in our hearts and minds, that form, that three-dimensional form, will free itself, and we can see it independent of architecture. And I think that's one of the essential ideas of this show, that in using these pavilions, in every case, we use them to free the dependency of these 20th century sculptures. I'm not, look at that. I mean, every piece you see there is not dependent on architecture.
But that's a bad photo, because that's like taken from 10 feet up, looking down. This is what you saw on the show. So I walk in and I'm looking at this catastrophe of sculptures all jumbled in on top of each other. And Richard's like, isn't it brilliant? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a catastrophe. And then I calm down and I sit with it and I look at it and I realize he's chosen these. You can't appreciate from the photographs, because being with the sculptures and in the space and these weird flimsy things, I'm worried about earthquakes and stuff, and these like cardboard cutout things holding these precious, which aren't actually cardboard, these are like thick.
The PVC.
It's
an entirely new use of a building material that has never been used in exhibition making before. That's another high point of this show.
But it looks like a space with walls going up, and then he's knocked a few of the walls down and put a couple screws, and it's super flimsy, but actually there's a lot of support, but it looks like it's super flimsy. So you have the sensation, you have this anxiety. I mean, I certainly had anxiety, but I think everybody had anxiety about the, you know, the nervousness of these pieces.
Oh boy, you know, this is what, like I say, you know, going for the jugular, because, you know, poor Sandy, who I adore and I esteem and so on, he becomes the person that is in the vulnerable position. So just that story that he told, because that image is very, very akin to the Life magazine article that they did of 1941 of the Pierre Matisse show, where that's how you see all these forms, whether they're mobiles or stabiles or so on, they're all interconnected, which is horrendous for me. And if I don't want to impose myself on other people, but that's the condition because they are dependent on architecture. Can be the shape of the magazine, but what Sandy is just describing is when he who is initially shocked by this, what he called jumble, gets into it, he sees that they free themselves from the dependency and they become independent, and you can experience every single one of those pieces much better than you ever could if it was dependent on architecture.
Richard, at one point you talked about how the pavilions function as frames, and of course buildings are also frames in a way. So it's almost by putting this framed space within the gallery, you kind of erase the gallery in some ways.
I think this is the rule.
The James Turrell space you're talking about?
Yeah.
It happens to be designed by James Turrell, yes.
That
was a whole discussion.
This is another discussion. But you know, I'm taking this from an observer, somewhat objective observer, spoke about how beautiful this show was because you have the initial space of the Turrell gallery, and then which is destroyed by this diagonal which runs through the space and is built with, you could say, I don't know, I think I've never mentioned this. Does anybody know about the Platonic solids? Yeah.
Everybody.
Everybody knows. Good.
Yost and I do, and my son Griffin.
Good.
Mark does.
It's okay. Well then, so this is a very you know, it's tongue in cheek because in any good show it has to be as many emotional responses as possible, and so, you know, humor has to be one of them, and you know, lightness, humor, whatever you want to call it. And so this you know, we saw that first sculpture. It's on a triangle. It's this three side, using this 4x8 material with the three sides, knowing all the time that when we built these pavilions, we could do anything we wanted to with them. We could use the interior space, we could use the exterior space, we could penetrate them, we could give this variety of, and for the viewer, it becomes not like the normal plastic bonnets and sockles or bases and so on that you usually confront in an exhibition. Also one of the other perhaps controversial ideas going on here is that it's my sense that the individual definition needs to be reconsidered, as it always does, but maybe particularly now. And I had this idea that an artist is like half of an individual. And so you make an exhibition like this and you have two artists and one tries to balance them And so, half, one's half and the other one, and it proposes an idea, a potential successful definition of capital I individual. And it actually, at openings when, all of LA came and were walking through these galleries and, people of all ages and so on, you really felt that they reached a confidence in themselves as individuals. That it was very heartwarming to see an exhibition have an effect like that. And I think the exhibition downstairs is also influenced, but how a message that has a human dimension, importance, can be made from the exhibition, the form of an exhibition.
I want to pick up on something you just said, which is the idea of two artists. And of course, it's unusual that one has an exhibition of Calder curated by an artist. That probably doesn't happen very often, I would imagine. And one of the things that struck me about this, among many others, is it also looks like, aside from the Pierre Matisse photos, it reminds me a little bit of what the studio images look like, the Roxbury studio, where you have a whole bunch of sculptures clustered on one surface. Of course, the surroundings are much less cluttered in general, but there's something about the feeling of the studio or the work coming together in a kind of precarious or tentative relationship that I think only an artist would kind of return back to the work. And there's something very anti-museological about that. So many gallery shows look like institutions or look like museum shows. And this is not something you would ever see in a museum. But I also think there's something sort of scary about that too. So the risk-taking part of it, I wonder if that was something that you were thinking about, Richard, to try to push against the way we normally see Calder presented.
Richard, let me answer.
Okay.
Because the thing is the person who took the biggest risk was me.
There you go.
I allowed Richard to do something I never, ever in my 34-year career let anybody else do. I've never asked.
And he told me this.
I never asked somebody to come in,
emails.
and I never stepped back and allowed him control. I've never done that before. And it was really nerve-wracking on FaceTime with my art handler. Richard was there in real time creating the show. He didn't have a strategy. He didn't make a bunch of, well, he made drawings, of course, because that's what he does, but he was in real time making these forms and cut it here and then oops, and put it back up and leave the cut, because that's part of it. That's part of the progress and the expression.
Yeah.
And then do this other thing, and it's all happening in real time. Leave the screws. Are we going to paint those screws? No, we're going to leave the screws. We're going to leave the hinge. The hinge is kind of crappy, but let's show the hinge. All these things were in real time.
Yeah.
And so I was in New York, nervous. What is Richard up to? I had a sense of what he was going to do, but nobody, not even Richard, knew what he was going to do. So it was really nerve-wracking. And to see a picture like that of the jumble was really worrisome. Because you can't appreciate it from the picture. You don't understand that it's a jumble that then opens up as you connect with it. It's really impossible to see that.
And also these voids, it's not as though it's a solid surface. The pieces of PVC are bowing. They're not,
yes.
they're not, it's hard to see, but they're not level, they're overlapping.
Yeah, not at all.
You can see a little better in this photo.
But in Richard's defense, every one of these experiences is unique. So like I said, he didn't have a strategy. He presented himself, he started carving and creating these spaces and he knew what work he wanted to put in, but he had 3 works, he had 2 works, he had 1 work, and then he had 4 works. It was this whole process of getting through to the right moment. When I showed up and discovered how brilliant this was, I picked up one of the sculptures and I put it down again. And Richard had a fit because I had moved it 3 millimeters. I'm not joking. And he was like, you can't do that. It was just exactly in the right spot. And then he showed me where it was, and it was very clear that that was exactly where it needed to be.
And this is something I think has been lost in the whole Calder world, probably even to Calder himself, that the stabiles have a a point. They might have legs that come over there or over here or something, but actually they work because there's a point where the whole, and this is back to my issue, that this is an artist who had something to say, and if we're going to do anything for him, we're going to listen to what he's trying to tell us. And because I know as an artist, you die before you get it all out, and so there should be somebody, following up who can, contribute. And Sandy, and this is what is sort of a beautiful thing, because, and why I say Sandy did such a fabulous job, and I'm not talking about what everybody else compliments you for. It's just the what yourself, what you've put into what you do. I mean, what you do and who you are has become so integrated that I'm talking about scary. I mean, I find that scary as well. But an illustration of that is after I visited in the country, I came back and I made a drawing, and I was very happy with that drawing, and I called it Calder Corrected. And Sandy and Ilan came by, and I showed this, and Sandy immediately said, "Oh, why don't you make a whole group of that?" And I said, "Oh, I don't work like that, something, But lo and behold, I did work like that, and wound up making 12 of these diptychs, which are a lot about the issue of the vertical, and it's kind of like a true art issue. It's not a philosophic issue, it's not an architecture. Well, it could be where an architectural issue and an art issue come together. It's what I call the true vertical. Okay, so there's 12 drawings that I showed at the Kordansky Gallery, which were of joining two pieces of paper together, so that touching of two sheets of paper became the site of the attempt to locate the true vertical, and the irony or the pun was that in this particular two-gallery exhibition, the achieving anything of importance could be extracted and brought over to the world of Calder to benefit. And where I'm talking about, like locating this point. And so, when Sandy moves this, and maybe he may think, or maybe just describe that he took it out of the place. That wasn't the problem. It was that he moved it off of the true point. And because we had worked so hard with each one of those to find the point and okay, I think just for correction's sake, there are 5 sculptures on that table. 4 are models or maquettes for other works, and 1 is a true work itself, the one that's in front right there. So they are actually handled differently. And
4.
What?
They're 4.
No, there are 1, 2. Okay, all right, okay.
3 maquettes and
okay,
one that has a title,
yeah,
which is this one.
Great. Okay. So
Gothic construction from scraps.
Exactly. So this is a completed piece, and it's given a special position, and that's a killer for me, because that's proves this pudding or this strategy that's pudding, or a pudding that's a strategy, where your main job is to free these sculptures from an architectural dependency. And the fact that you can have a real sculpture with maquettes is like you could say the acid test. If you only had a model in that situation, it would be listed in the positive column. But the fact that you have, the piece, what I'm calling the real one, which has a little red spinner top on it, is absolutely a recognized masterpiece, as it should be. And it's featured online and everything. But if we could be at the exhibition right now, there's something that happens with in here, and that it's like, with your imagination, and you could make yourself tiny, and you could walk around each one of those sculptures, and you wouldn't, your relation with that sculpture would be not interrupted by anything.
Yeah, it's like you've disrupted
pavilion,
the maquette-ness of them. But Richard, I want to go pick up on something you just said, which is the recognized masterwork thing, because this is actually, before you get to that jumble of four works, you have this, the tuning fork, which is another really exquisite work, but by contrast is presented on its own, with one opening in a much more kind of stable position.
Can I throw in here that this was, and I'm sad to say, maybe I don't know, responsible, but this was, it's my idea, you could say, but it was actually done before I arrived, and so being, a professional, I just sucked it up, and there was enough. The wealth of new and strong ideas that we had available to the public was such, it didn't, for example, this one, what is it?
That doesn't surprise me, because it seemed the most straightforward and unusually straightforward for you.
It's this whole relation between ideas and inspiration and everything, and that like this wound up right in front of a fan, from the ceiling, and that the fan, moved the sculpture, and that would have been a plus, in certain people's minds, but it didn't move it in a correct way. There would be normally room currents, for example, or just somebody coming to look at it that would affect it. It's not correct that it would be affected by an air conditioning system. And that wouldn't have happened if I had been there at the beginning. Yeah.
Jumping forward a little bit, because you talked about architecture quite a bit, you built a piece of architecture in this pavilion which you actually enter to see these works on paper, which I think are some of the lesser known of the works in the show. Certainly Calder's drawings aren't as widely seen as the sculpture, and certainly not in this way.
This was a huge learning experience too, because one thing I learned, I walked into that pavilion and I said, Poussin, this is like being surrounded by Poussin. And I think about Poussin a lot, and that, this structure, how, Poussin will begin with structure and then turn into the sensual. And that that's what happens with these drawings. The other thing was how I'm just stunned how Calder could absorb French culture that deeply and that creatively to be able to make drawings like this as an American. I mean, because he defines Americanism. We know he had a strong relation with France and so on, but even in these, you can see you can impose an equilateral triangle on them and see how they're built structurally. And that then taught me that when you look at a Calder, look at structure first and sensuality, and then you can get, because the whole point is this is an artist who has something to say, and it's so much better if you listen to them, but you have to figure out how to listen to them. And like it would, for example, if he were, another, if he began with the sensual and then went to the structure, you can't see it. It's just not available to you. And so
you also couldn't see it because there was no light in this room.
Well,
there was light, but there were no lights directly on the works, which is very unusual.
A scrim. There was
a scrim for the ceiling.
A scrim, and so natural lighting. But this was also part of the, you could say, genius of these pavilions, because we couldn't show these out in LA light, with skylights all over the place. They needed a bell level that's, respectful, of being works on paper.
Yeah, so this gallery has skylights. There's a lot of natural light coming in of it.
But what really shocked me about this pavilion was, well, first of all, these drawings have never been framed. They've never been seen. They've never seen any light. They've been in storage since they were made in '39.
Wow.
So we pulled them out for Richard for this show, and he did that. Like, who does that? That's weird. But to go into this sacred space that he made within a sacred space was totally phenomenal. And it gave me a chance to look at, I've looked at the drawings, I've examined the drawings, we've done condition reporting of the drawings, but to be in that space the way he did it, he designed the frames. By the way, so Richard came to my office, came to the foundation and started choosing works, and then we had this list, and it all evolved, and I thought that was kind of it. I thought that was it. I thought that was the whole project. And then he started making drawings of these kind of pavilion ideas, and he showed me a few of those, and then I went over to his house and he started talking. He's verbose, I don't know if you noticed. And he was talking a blue streak about Calder, and I said, Richard, can you just write some of that? Let me get out my iPhone, I'll record you. Can you just write some of this down? And he's like, oh yeah, okay. So then he proceeds to write 16 texts on Calder in a catalog. He designs the show, he installs the show, he's there every second. He doesn't let anybody else, except for that first piece. Yeah. He moved it though, I know. And then he designs the catalog, which is still in production or something. And it's this beast of it's a giant brick, because both shows, and he put his texts about Calder, which are totally phenomenal, in amongst his work, not in amongst the Calder. It's really fascinating. And I'm very proud of myself that I stepped back and we only fought twice, I think.
Yeah. But when actually this idea, and I thank you, Mark, for going for this, but I just thought it was a godsend, because I don't know, for contemporary artists, it's hard for people to suspend the disbelief, to appreciate what they have to offer. But one of the things I would hope the audience could take away, and it's a special point, but how these pavilions come right down to the floor. And Stephen, if you, I know you, because isn't that amazing that they look okay coming right down to the floor like that, because ordinarily in exhibition making, they have to have a little quarter-inch, pickup there and there.
A reveal.
And that's, I think, some kind of sign, because we see on so many levels and unconsciously and so on that this is possible because the goal is to free the sculpture. Okay. Is this going to be bad? Oh boy.
Just do it.
How
Just do
many
it.
how many times do we see these sculptures plunked in front of buildings? And how much better would it be if we could see the sculpture, in a dependent, non-dependent way, and also, but the architecture as architecture, what do you get out of having a sculpture dependent on architecture? I mean, I ask you, what do you get from that?
But it's not really clear.
But if you get, if in the same point, you can, that there can be a sculpture. There's no reason why there can't be a sculpture in front of a building, But it should be in a way where you can get everything you can get out of a sculpture, and you can get everything you can get out of the building. Not less of a building and less of a sculpture. And certain sculptors, I remember David Smith was sort of famous for saying he would never accept a commission, to have a work of his. And it was, at the time, this guy is saying, it was like a ego thing where, I'm not going to compete with a building, I don't want people to look at me.
I just want to point out that picture there of
Yeah.
sphere pierced by cylinders,
Yeah,
it looks like you trapped it, but only standing there with it do you feel a sense of freedom from what you did.
yeah.
It looks bad there in looking at a photograph because it just feels like you just took a Calder and you wrapped it in this weird confection of Tuttle that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Because you can't experience it, so you can't fully get it.
But can you imagine, just in your mind, take away the platforms, take away everything and just see it on the gallery wall, see it plunked against the gallery wall, then it's in a dependent relation on architecture. And you don't, this was I love this piece when we first saw it, and Sandy, I think very correctly, had it restored for the exhibition because, with it being rusted in time and so on, there's so many intersections of tubes that are happening inside the circle, and I wanted people to be able to, get involved and get into that and see that, because I know there again, Calder was trying to say something, and one of the other ideas about this show is for the younger artists, and that an artist, when they look at somebody like Calder and they say, well, nobody's listening to Calder, who's going to listen to me? It's really depressing. It is, and so this, like I say, it's a godsend because enough people, I think, caught the message. Thanks to your letting Richard have a little more.
Thanks to Sandy's risk
A
taking.
little longer leash, than most of them get.
Well, speaking of a long leash, in the interest of time,
Yes.
I think maybe we could open it up and take a couple questions from the audience, if there are any. So if you have a question,
Anybody
please
have any smart questions?
raise your hand. I think there's one right here. Do we have a mic? Okay, there we go.
Could you just raise your hand again for me?
Thank you so much. Is that on?
Yep, we can hear you.
The subtitle is Tentative, but you're anything but tentative in your approach. So what's why?
Actually, that's a brilliant thing to bring up, because I think that's what is lost in the photographs the most. Because just the way the photograph projects and becomes so didactic and everything, this tentative quality is lost. But one of the things I discovered was because I just wrote 10 poems on Powell Clay from 1939. And I said, well, why am I interested in 1939? And was for quite some time, I think it's pretty well shared now that before the First World War, there was a tremendous outpouring of creativity in all forms, literature, music, and so 39 was because the artists, in our society, our job is to supply abstraction. And when abstraction is consumed, we go to war. And so, artists who are, the job is human, that they just start going into overdrive. And so, and this tentative quality, that would be the same if you wanted to find a word to characterize the art of 1913, you could say tentative, because it's a tentative, like if we could, then this will not happen. But it was lovely. I mean, one of these things where I was late one night and I just wrote this out. I mean, I like typography and so on, and I'm quite proud of that's another high point, because we have, as far as type is concerned, we have serif faces or sans serif faces, and nobody's thought of a join between those two. But that tentative is written so that it has one serif per letter, and it kind of has an edgy. It has it's one of those. It itself is tentative, and it's saying tentative. It was expanded on a billboard size in LA, and it held up, like being like 30 feet long or something from your kitchen table. It was pretty amazing.
I think we had another.
Sandy loves typography, so do you, and you love also to make catalogs and printing better. So does Sandy. But Sandy has at least 3 famous photographers who are in the history of the foundation and Calder.
Yes.
He nurtures them.
Yes.
He collects photography. So that you both do this fantastic dance, and then there is no brilliant photographer as the third leg to this team, is ridiculous.
Okay. I'm gonna defend the photographer. The photographer is Freddie. His name is Freddie. He's the level of photographer, who is thinking about the book, and he works very closely with Lorraine. These are, when you get a photographer of that level who is so dedicated to the page, or using the photography on the page, you can't take his work and project it on a screen like this,
Apologize for photography 20 times.
I think I can take responsibility for that. These are kind of standard installation photographs that are made the way you would photograph any installation. It's a great point you make, though, but I would say that there probably do exist wonderful photographs of this show. I just don't have them to show you. But they're out there in the world, I'm sure.
We're not sharing them with you, Joost. You disruptor.
Do we have maybe one more question?
Can I pick on Stephen Hull again, because he's this year has been the this architect who is responsible for all of the 12 issues of Domus magazine, and he, in his connections, was introduced to this show and had it photographed by his person, and it will be printed in Domus magazine
In May. It
comes in
comes
May.
it's in the press now. You can't change it.
It's
And the text
But-
has nothing to do with what you two just said. So that'll add a third opinion.
Good.
And we paired it with your work that was here at Pace last year. Those wonderful bronze that were done at the
wow.
foundry upstate.
Wow.
So we paired you a different way in the May Domus. So I hope everybody will take a look.
And Stephen, who's responsible for like having a concept for each issue, this issue will the concept for this issue will be the haptic. And
Haptic
everybody should, I mean, it's a great magazine of my youth. Like you couldn't live without seeing Domus. But anyway, this May issue sounds unbelievable. I think. Yeah.
I think maybe we had one last question for Mark. Yeah.
So there it is. This is what I referred to as the burqa.
The burqa.
Yeah, the burqa. And there's two things like this where there's a kind of demure hiding of the piece. And this has a piece with some very private parts to it, actually.
Yes.
And it should be
quote private. Yeah.
private parts.
Private,
Parts. If you go to the next down at the rocker down at the bottom there's some private bits. What is that effect of hiding? There's many things happening, but one thing happening. This and the piece encased, Mr. Spiky, as we call it, encased in the box. What is the effect? What are you doing to us by hiding these pieces?
He's showing them to us.
I know.
But you don't get it from the photos. These crappy ass photos.
Yeah, but look at it. Go back one again. That is a very good photo right there.
I'm joking. I actually like the photographs. I think you get a sensation of the show. I don't think you can really feel the show. That's what I said at the very beginning. From any photography, not even Jost's fantasy photographer could do a great job of presenting what you feel when you're in front of. Because when I saw this on FaceTime, I was like, what is he doing now? Like, what's going on? This is a disaster. But when you're standing there and you do see this theatrical presentation, and this weird plastic, it looks like sheetrock, but it's not. It's plastic sheets with piano hinges screwed together, holding it at the angle. And as you approach this window, like a TV or anything, and then you have to get close. You have to approach it in a way. You have to get closer to it than we'll let you in a museum, right? You have to actually get close enough to look down into that space and see it from your particular perspective, which does actually focus you on the overtly sexual part that Mark was alluding to.
That's right.
Down at the bottom,
Yeah.
which you can't really see in the picture, fortunately.
But Sandy's mind immediately grasped that it's a pun on James Turrell.
Well, I don't want to say that.
No, but it's I mean it's like his gallery and one of the things art is a community, and you can have your whatever thoughts, but then I guess I want to say one amazing or share something that's happened to me recently. I have the drawing that's the first grid of Agnes Martin, and this grid is the horizontal lines all go beyond the 9-inch square, and the vertical lines go beyond the 9-inch square. And in the beginning, well, it's a drawing, I'm just going to frame the whole thing. But as the years went by, she developed her thinking that she wanted a silk mat that had a 9-inch window, and then it was make the 12-inch frame. And I realized that so basically that's when I framed it that way, you don't see this part of the drawing, but you do see the 9-inch square much better. So, and in addition to that, you have, as if in your imagination, you can see the weave of the silk mat is superimposed on the lines that extend, that you can't see. And so it creates a zone around the drawing. And I find that in terms of Agnes's work, which is still revealing itself to us, that has like something very important to say about the human stuff that we go through, that the artwork goes through to reach the audience. And that is, I think, that very thing is the ingredient of every good work of art. And I see what's happening here by, initially you may not see the whole piece, but you're excited and you're brought to yourself from that moment when you realize you can't see the whole piece. You are activated and you are a participant, and it's your motion, it's what you want to do that brings you to the piece. And believe me, you see a lot more than if it's handed to you, on a silver platter.
I think you just answered Mark's question, yeah.